Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Purdue. I hope you are pleased with the weather that we ordered for you. Trust me, it was not like this a week ago. We have a great agenda set up for today. I'm not going to speak very long at all this morning, but I will introduce myself. I'm Joel Rasmus. I'm the Managing Director of CERIAS, and I'm pleased that you're all here. Our first speaker this morning, who's actually going to do your formal welcome, is Tomás Diaz de la Rubia, who is the Chief Scientist and Vice President for Purdue's Discovery Park. CERIAS is one of the centers in Purdue's Discovery Park. And before joining Purdue, Tomás was the Chief Research Officer and the Deputy Director of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. So he brought a wealth of experience to the university and has been wonderful reporting up through his organization these last couple of years. Tomás?
Thank you, Joel. It's great to be here. Thank you, everybody who has come and joined us again for this 21st edition of the CERIAS Cybersecurity Conference. Really is a pleasure and an honor to have you all here. We're really thankful not only for your participation today, but really for your engagement with CERIAS and the university over the years, the industrial consortium and the collaborations and partnerships that you all help us build so that our work, our ideas, our education activities for our future graduates all have the highest and best possible impact on society in general, and really on national security and the field in particular of cybersecurity. I think, as you probably know by now, I suppose many of you have been here before, Purdue is a university that is very, very strongly dedicated to the national security mission. Everybody from President Mitch Daniels down believes strongly, and particularly he does. I can tell you that from a first-person account, he believes very strongly that national security defense is part of our land-grant mission. That we as a land-grant university are dedicated to service, education, research, and engagement in the public interest, and that a big part of that is our dedication to advancing ideas, new knowledge, technologies, partnerships that will help impact in a positive way the national security posture of the country. And what event could be more timely and more important than this event here today when it comes to the future of national security? We live in an era in which I think we're moving from the traditional thoughts about cybersecurity and securing our computer networks and trying to prevent intrusion to an era in which we are surrounded by exponentially growing technologies which are having a deeper impact on society than I think we even understand today. The development of everything from artificial intelligence to machine learning to robotics to all kinds of digital technologies that are impacting the Internet of Things and the application of sensors and data all over our lives is having a huge positive impact on society. I mean, we're seeing already, we have groups here on campus that are working on how to apply machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques together with tens of millions of healthcare, private healthcare data on trying to improve both diagnostics and therapeutics in the healthcare sector, for example. What could be more important, what could be better, what could be more impactful to society than efforts like that? But on the other hand, you know, of course, and that's why you're all here, there is the other side. There is the threat of loss of privacy, there's the threat of loss of data, there's the threat of intrusion that could lead to bad outcomes that will affect society in negative ways. So, you know, we are thrilled at Discovery Park to host CERIAS. This happened about 2 years ago, as Joel said. Discovery Park is dedicated to incentivizing and promoting an ecosystem in which science, technology, engineering, and research happen in a completely transdisciplinary way, tearing down all kinds of traditional academic boundaries. And CERIAS exemplifies that vision because, you know, the faculty, the students that work within CERIAS are truly dedicated to advancing security, information security, and cyber physical security across all applications in society. not just for the sake of computer science, although that is important too, advancing the fundamentals of information theory and computer science in this space, but also the application of these methods to all kinds of societal issues with high impact, as the one I was mentioning in healthcare. So I certainly hope that you will have an absolutely fantastic event. I know that the agenda looks phenomenal, and really on behalf of Purdue University and Discovery Park, again, thank you so much for being here. I welcome you all, and best wishes for a successful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomas. Is this actually working? Okay. I couldn't hear it. So I wanted to make sure before we got too far into the program today that everyone could hear. And welcome, I'd like to welcome you personally myself. I'm David Ebert. I'm the interim director of CERIAS, following a long tradition of excellent lead here for CERIAS. And it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our keynote speaker, Ray Rothrock, who is with RedSeal. And it's an enterprise cybersecurity company that is based in California. And besides his excellent work in cybersecurity, he's also part of a band called Up and to the Right. So if you're in the Bay Area, go and check them out. And always amazed at people who have enough time to be involved in so many different things, showing all their different aspects of creativity. And he'll be talking about digital resilience. Is your company ready for the next cyber threat? He'll also be signing his book tonight during our poster session. And with that, let's welcome Ray.
Okay, so working? Terrific. Good morning. Great, boy, I'm gonna put this out here. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I would say this weather is because I come from California, but I know better. It's been a pretty tough winter out there. So this is one of my favorite topics, and I really just spend a few minutes this morning taking you through some of my learnings as a venture capitalist. I was a VC for 25 years with the Rockefeller family out of New York City, where I discovered cybersecurity, if you will. Before that, at Sun Microsystems, and before that, I was a nuclear engineer. So the concept of thinking ahead and be protective is a really good idea. One of the things I've learned, I've been very lucky. The board of MIT and some other places, you meet a lot of interesting people. And one of the, in public boards, I've been on 8 public boards. One of the things that really comes through is that communication and vocabulary is really, really important. And unfortunately, cyber is full of technical gobbledygook. I mean, I'm pretty technical. I still, believe it or not, program routers and firewalls and a few things like that. I wouldn't admit that except to a crowd like this. But there's just a whole conversation that's missing. So I wrote this book, Digital Resilience. It came out last summer, to begin to try to explain what this world we're living in and put it into English, words and communication that people can understand. So in the course of all my time as a VC and doing cyber deals, I did 15 cyber deals while I was at Venrock. So I've been very active, and now I'm the CEO of one of our investments, RedSeal. I met Dick Clark. Dick and I have been working a long time on some ideas, and he very much encouraged me to write this book. So I want to thank Dick for that, because the concept of resilience, though it's a word we all use and know, how does it work, how does it apply, here really matters. As a venture capitalist, one of the hallmarks of being a good VC is good pattern recognition. I'm sure everybody knows what I mean by that. Good engineers have pattern recognition. Entrepreneurs have good pattern recognition. But VCs have good pattern recognition. And so I take a lot of those learnings and I pack it into this book to try to bring real-world experiences through patterns into the cyber world. And like I said, I'm probably preaching a little bit to the choir about some of that. So I always let's see which way goes next. Okay, so how many people think we're winning this thing called the cyber war? Show of hands? Yeah, how many think? A lot of heads going left, back and forth. Yeah, it's pretty tough. Pretty tough times. It's probably not going to get better before it's not going to get better before it gets more worse. I think we do have an issue, and we really got to get at it. You know, the history would suggest, and I've been investing since in the early 80s in the world, but history would suggest we're not winning. So back in the day, there was antivirus and virus stuff, and it was passed around on floppy disk, if you remember what those things were. And it was a problem, but we kind of solved that. This is about an $8 billion problem in terms of the software sales today. And then we had networks. Networks were starting to hook things together. The internet happened. You know, Tim Berners-Lee invented HTML, and suddenly it was no more just the domain of scientists sharing information. It was suddenly Amazon appeared and Yahoo, and the world was just connecting up like crazy without much regard. And then we had firewalls. The military has had those things for a long time, but those sort of burst on the scene in the early 90s. I did this deal called Checkpoint Software out of Tel Aviv, Israel. I'll never forget when I came back to my partners in New York. I was the youngster in the group. They were all gray hair like I am now, but I said, guys, we need to get into the internet business, and we need to make some investments fast. And the first one I think I'd like to make is in security. And they said, okay, go out and figure that out. So I came back and I said, oh, so I got some great news. I said, there are lots of firewall companies. And they said, well, what could be the bad news? I said, the best one, I think, is located in Israel. And this is the Rockefeller family. And even though they're an international group, the idea of wiring $10 million out of the United States to this 5-person company in Tel Aviv was hard to sell. But we did it. And, of course, Checkpoint turned out to be a huge success. But it gave me an insight into what was coming, right? So there was intrusion detection came along. I did a company called Imperva, PGP software, and a bunch of others along the way. Each time kind of addressing the problem of the day, whether it was a gateway with a firewall, whether it was some bad behavior on a network through intrusion detection. My deal there was called Haystack Labs. Or whether it was database protection, you know, fending off SQL attacks and stuff. Just whatever it was an event. I call it whack-a-mole, where there was a mole sticks his head up, and suddenly entrepreneurs just went whack. And the VCs were writing checks faster than we could cash them. And so it was a big deal, And then we had zero-day stuff. Next generation firewall came out. We moved out of the stack, the OSI layer 3-4 up to 7. FireEye, which was on its absolute last breath, when this whole thing happened, just exploded, went public, and of course the rest is history, and all that. And that became the word of the day in the boardrooms of America. So, but history would suggest that we're losing. Each of these is kind of a proxy for how the threats have grown and how the business has grown. Today, the cyber software business is about a 25-30 billion. Services are about twice that. So all in, it's about 110 billion. So, but yet, no one has really come up with a silver bullet to deal with all this. In fact, I think a real tipping point for me, I retired from Venrock in 2013, but that very December was when Target was revealed to have this big problem. Everybody knows what the Target attack is, right? Yeah. Pretty serious. Here's a Fortune 50 company with technology that I had built through my investments and they had purchased. They had engineers, they had capital, they had technology. Yet they were hammered and was an embarrassment to the whole world. 40 million customer records went out the door. It was a massive problem. And the pattern recognition moment I had, although I just retired from Venrock, was, wow, the bad stuff is inside. It's already there. This notion of putting up a firewall, a perimeter, is like old news. You got to have it, but it's old news. So what's inside? So, you know, and then, of course, recently we've got Russia and China and North Korea at the Sony attack. We have nation states involved, and we're probably doing some of this bad stuff too. But it's a wide open thing. So this threat is real, and you all, nobody raised their hand when I asked the question, are we in a war? Or are we winning a war? And so there you go. So then I asked myself, so how'd the bad guys get in? Well, they get inside because of phishing. Everybody knows what phishing is, right? 99% of the successful exfiltrations come from phishing. So the technology works pretty well. We've got good processes and stuff, but at the end of the day, you and me are going to accidentally or on purpose click on something we shouldn't, divulge some information we shouldn't, and release the problem. So if we're going to release the problem, it's a little bit like this building. This building's got sprinkler systems, right? Why do they put a sprinkler system in here? Does anybody expect this building to catch on fire? No, of course not, but there's a sprinkler system. I didn't see an elevator, but if you'd ridden an elevator up, did you go by the office to check that the elevator had been inspected? No. Did you believe that the building is going to stand while we sit here and have this conversation? Of course you did. Those concepts don't exist here, and the phishing is just a piece of it that starts. So what is this costing us? It's costing us trillions of dollars. This is Forbes in 2016. I haven't seen an update recently. I haven't tried to find one, but it's massive. Does anybody know what the research budget of the entire United States, private and public sector, is? What that number is? Does anybody know what that number is? Yes, it is. It's $500 billion. And the government spends only $100 billion. So $400 billion private. So this number exceeds 3 or 4 times what we spend in research. And this money finds its way to the bad guys somehow. And so the fear I have, being an investor in innovation and in the quality of life, we all have iPhones or something like that. I mean, technology has really transformed our way of living. Every time we have to invent a new piece of cybersecurity software, it takes away from those other productive uses of R&D money. So these guys are winning, and it's a real problem. But moreover, I think it's about trust. When Target happened, their stock dipped a little bit. A lot of people probably stopped shopping there. And it came right back. And then we had Sony. And then we had Equifax. And, now I actually just the other day I needed to reopen. I locked all my credit card company stuff down, and I needed to open it up for something, and I couldn't do it. They have interrupted their business with such a high friction entry point to open it up to let someone get that information. It's like, I don't like these people. They have no right for my data, but there they are. And so, how do we, these poor folks, Wells Fargo, Equifax, and this is an interesting one, right? The Facebook guys. I think it was yesterday or last week's testimony. So look, organizations still fail the basic cyber hygiene test. We don't even train people. I was at an insurance company in Chicago last year giving a talk to a bunch of underwriters, just a general talk about cybersecurity. And I said, how many people take phishing tests? And they have, we use it at my company. Has everybody done a phishing test online, all that, right? Yeah. So, just like you, most everybody raised their hand, and I said, how many people have taken 2? And about half the people. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I said, what happens if you fail 3 times? If you're in a company and you're handling personal information and you can't quite grok the notion of phishing and how to deal with it, if you fail 3 times, what does a company do about you? You need a policy to deal with that. But more importantly, what if the CEO fails 3 times? What if a board member fails? What if the CFO fails 3 times? What do you do? These are hard things to contemplate. Companies and compliance and governance it's just now starting to trickle in, and that's what I've been trying to do with my book. So there's a great book put out a couple of years ago. I don't know if you've heard of it. Judith Rodin, she was president of Rockefeller Foundation. It's called The Resilience Dividend. This was a little bit of an inspiration for me when I was thinking about how to get the message out about resilience in the cyber world. She talks about cities in the United States. This is a 2014 publication. So in 2014, there were 3 cities in the United States that had a chief resilience officer. 3. How many do you think there are today? There are about 100. And you can think about it for a minute. So New Orleans probably has a chief resilience officer who worries about the dikes and the water and all the things, levees and all that's going on there. San Francisco, what do you worry about? You worry about earthquakes. What about Boston? This is an interesting one. They worry about civil unrest. That's what the CRO in Boston worries about. So Chicago, all the big cities in the country now have them. There may even be a chief resilience officer here in Lafayette. I don't know. As I flew in, I looked down and saw the rivers out in the farmlands. Unbelievable picture I took. When you see it real, I'm sure you guys live it and know it. It's really sad. But anyway, this is a really good book. It talked a lot about, she has case studies. And it really was an inspiration for me. So I often get to the point of, what's a good model for resilience? And the human body comes to mind. And I didn't think this up originally, but if you think about a network, it has a perimeter. It has stuff that moves inside on wires or maybe wirelessly. You have all these things. And just to give you just to personalize it, so your skin, right? Your skin, you have eyes, mouth, ears, nose, and other things. But your skin is that perimeter protection. And it stays pretty well, and you have an intended penetration when you eat something or when you hear something or otherwise. But what if you cut yourself? Now you have an unintended penetration. And then we have systems in our bodies, white blood cells, that immediately find out where that penetration is and attack anything that gets in. That's intrusion detection. And then we have red blood cells, which actually do the repair. Human nature has, or not human nature, nature has done a great job with resilience. And so my CTO is actually an epidemiologist, and he has applied many of the things he's learned from his professional life into the networking world, and it's the inspiration for the company that I now lead called RedSeal. There we go. So I think at the end of the day, after having made all these investments and all this technology, and we're not winning, something has to change. That old axiom, if you do the same thing and expect a different result, that's called insanity. Maybe Einstein said that or somebody. I don't know who gets credit for it. It's a good one. And that's where we are on the cyber world. We have to do things differently. We have to think differently, and the pattern to me suggests we think like Mother Nature has done, like these buildings have done, like our society has done. We have to think with resilience. It's a big deal. But resilience is not a product, it's a strategy. It's a process, it's people, and it's technology. $25 billion in technology. Last year, VC, the venture capital world, put in $5 billion in investment here. We were just talking, Gene and I were just talking about RSA and the lack of innovation. It seems like we're sort of going around the horn again. But technology is there. Processes are important. People got to know what to do and how to do it, because people change jobs and things come and go. And then you have people. Processes without people is a failure. Processes without technology and people are a failure. So you got to have all three of those things. Very, very important. So technology. Most systems are not built with resilience in mind. The internet was built originally, right? The DARPANET, the whole ability to get a message across the country during a nuclear war. Well, that was good then, but not so good now. But it wasn't built with resilience in mind. And it's really, three main things: data, network, and infrastructure. My company, RedSeal, focuses here. We don't focus on the data piece, because I think the first thing about resilience is understanding what the heck you have. What does it look like? How does it operate? Jacks are better to even be in the game. And then once you understand what you have and then how it's hooked together, then you can worry about the data. Of course, data is what the bad guys are after. So these four things: understanding and visibility. So we at RedSeal have over 250 large customers, from the federal government to Fortune 500 companies. And 100% of the time when we run our software on somebody's network, we find things that they didn't know existed, or that we find mistakes that they have. Last week, we closed a deal with the Defense Intelligence Agency. These are smart dudes, man. They know what they're doing. They have not quite infinite budgets, but they can spend what they want to get done what they want. And we were there, and my federal chief technology officer was just telling me this story yesterday, actually. We were there, and they said, well, okay, we're going to run the software on your legacy network. And they said, no, we don't care about the legacy network. We think we got that under control. Okay, where are you going to go? We'll go to the cloud. Brand new, brand spanking new, just stood up. They have this thing called a C2S, which is behind the firewalls and the federal government. So we ran our software against the cloud. And we were still analyzing, still understanding how things were hooked together, and they screamed, oh my God, stop. That is wrong. That piece of the network, that enclave is wrong, and it's connected to this thing over here. This is brand new stuff. They just stood it up in the last year. So people make mistakes. They have great intentions, smart people. But if you can't see it, you can't manage it, you can't understand it. This is where it all starts. The other thing, measurement. So in all my years of investing in cybersecurity, admittedly it was a niche business, No one ever showed up and said, I'm going to give you a product that tells you how good you've done. Measurement was not even part of the conversation. I will tell you, folks, the board only understands one thing: numbers and measurement and trends. So if you want to talk about cyber up the chain in corporate America or in our policy world, you got to talk about numbers. So we've built into our product at RedSeal a thing called the Digital Resilience Score. We actually will give you a score. We'll give you, and it's just like FICO score. FICO goes from 350 to 800. If you're a 725 network, you're pretty good shape. Just like in 725 FICO, you can probably go borrow money to buy a house. If you're 375, well, you probably just lost your job. But it's about giving a score to leadership to know what to do next. Not only that, but then we give you reasons codes and we give you recommendations of how to bring it up or bring it down. Whatever you got to do. But measurement is really, really important. So if you understand it and you can measure it, then you can be in compliance. And compliance is not just the public policy stuff like PCI and all that, but it's what your own policies are. Target, I mean, they probably had a policy that said the HVA system should not be talking to the point of sale systems. They probably had that policy, but they couldn't prove it. And that's where the understanding of visibility matters. They did, in fact, in the first chapter of my book, I detail quite a lot about, from a management point of view, what went wrong. And interesting, I learned this. I didn't know this at the time it was happening, but they do have a policy and a procedure in the store that says at night they turn off the cash registers after they transfer the data out. But it was the Christmas season, and somebody forgot to turn off the cash registers. And even though the hard drives had been cleaned of the PCI data was in the memory of the computers. So the software, the malware, found it in the memory, and that's what started the problem. But they had a policy, they had a compliance, but they couldn't prove it. So interesting there. And then accelerate response. This is one people think you have a cyber alarm bell go off, and oh well, they'll just take care of this. You know, some bright cyber wonk will get online, type a few things, and the screen will go, and all of a sudden the problem's solved. No, nothing could be further than the truth. It can take months, even years. Sony was 11 months in the making on this one. But the people said, well, I don't understand. I said, okay, you're at home, your house catches on fire, you dial 911, and you run out the door. 2 weeks later, the fire department shows up. That's where cyber response is. Your house just burned to the ground. It's a real problem. So we call this sort of arc of getting resilient, understanding, measuring, managing, and then being able to respond because you know where everything is and how to respond to it. These are the building blocks, very important. So, when we do surveys, and we do this every year, 76% of the CEOs believe that they have an accurate print of their network. They probably do, but it's a paper copy that is about 3 or 4 years old, and the network has changed last hour, yesterday, last week. As I said a few minutes ago, every time we run our software, we find new stuff. Every time. And even if you've installed it, every time it runs again, you're going to find new stuff because people change. There's this whole thing called shadow IT. You probably have heard the term. So data moves on to pathways. The pathways are programmed in the routing tables and all that. And understanding all that is very hard to do. Our largest customer, the U.S. Post Office, has 46,000 routers. So can you imagine a problem occurring and some technician at the SOC in Washington having to figure out what's wrong with the router in Oregon, for example? It's a real problem. So we model that, and we give them the tools to see how it goes. It's not trivial. 46,000. Apple's 110,000 routers, and we're just scratching the surface there. So these networks have been built over decades by smart people with good intentions, but they simply don't have all the answers. Here's the scoring I was talking about, our little FICO score concept. We look at all the vulnerabilities in your network, the configuration data to make sure you've done it according to the vendor, and then we do this calculation of pathways known and unknown. So one of the things that, all you got to do is give our software one credential, and we'll figure out the whole thing. And by this isn't a commercial, I'm just sort of giving you examples of how we've learned why this is important. And eventually our software will get to a router and it's finding an interface and it'll go out and it'll knock on the door of the next router. and that router's not responding, or it's responding, but who are you? I'm not letting you in. So that's called a dangling link, we call it, and it's hanging out there, and we flag it. And maybe it's connected to someone in the supply chain that shouldn't be connected to the supply chain, or maybe you've done an M&A, and this is a bank, and there's some bad things going on. Anyway, there's a million reasons why you can have the unknowns. And if you're the new CISO, the first question the new CISO wants to do, tell me what I know. Tell me what I've got. So this is the response. It's terrible. It's getting better, but it's not great. And anything we can, the Army, and in fact the military in general, has stood up these things called cyber protection teams, where they carry lots of software on their laptops instead of a M16. And they go in and they do audits. They go out in the forward operating bases, wherever they are in the world, and they make sure these networks are all good and that they can be responsive. So it's quite exciting, and we're getting there, and we're learning a lot about this process and people if they've got the right technology. So there's a million things. Has everybody run a SOC? Everybody here had an incident? Yeah, you should go see one. You should be in the room when you have one. I was in the room once when a company in the Midwest, I won't say who, I was standing there, we're doing this whole thing, and all of a sudden the alarm bells went off. Wow, you have a problem. So, but just finding it is hard. Sometimes people obscure the names of routers or whatever, you don't know what it is. Just finding it's hard, then the blast radius, it's just what are my options, what can I do? I have heard, though I've never seen it be the case, people actually unplug equipment if they can't quite figure things out. We actually have one bank in New York who, through a remodeling, had walled off a data center, just put up a wall and everything behind it. And we discovered this data center when we ran our software. They had forgotten about it. The computers were on, the lights were on, it was processing data, but no one knew about it. It's just an example. It's, again, not nefarious on the part of the customer of the company, but it's just the way our world has expanded. So it's not a straight line to success. You need good processes. You got to know your outcomes. You got to have technology in hand. You got to have people. People are really important. Skilled people are hard. So, I love it when I go to universities and even anywhere actually, and I hear about, people are taking cyber courses and stuff. But what's missing in the people world, I mean, there's plenty of, we need more engineers for sure, and process people and compliance people. But what we also need is what I call the plumbers, painters, and electricians of the cyber world. These are the folks who don't want to do a college experience. They want to get a skilled job in labor. We need those people by the hundreds of thousands to operate these SOCs that everybody's putting up to control. So resilience is a strategy. Just to sum it up, starts in the C-suite. You got to drive it through the enterprise. One of the things that you learn as a public, you can only do so much, but you can have standards and you can have measurements, and that gives you a conversation when you're trying to solve the problem. We can do this better. We must do this better. I really firmly believe, Dick Clark agrees with me, and many other people, that resilience is the future. It's not one product. It's not one company. It's not one thing. It's a way of thinking to increase our trust and confidence and capability, and it starts at the very top of the organization. So the key takeaways from my book is that you got to frame resilience as a business problem, not a technical gobbledygook. That was the first sentence. This technical gobbledygook, we got to stop. You just got to stop it. Because you got to talk about it as if it matters. One of the things I suggest in the book, talk about cyber problems as like competition, right? What if the competition had access? Ask what can go wrong. This is, be amazed people don't ask that. Good engineers don't ask this question. Basic cyber training for everyone. This is now pretty much happening everywhere. Even when I remember we implemented it at my company, RedSeal, I went home and told my wife about it. She said, well, can I take this training? I said, sure, and gave her the, because it's happening to everybody. Put experts at the table. It's an opportunity for everybody in this room. I'm sure you're already in that conversation. But there's so many boards that have, or not just boards, but senior management that don't have any experience. There's a lot of CISOs have gotten to the top by being great engineers, and they were never trained to talk about their job in words that the business people understand. Metrics matter, and it's really key. So I often give talks to boards, particularly public boards, because they don't have a cyber person in the room. They see their buddies mentioned in the newspaper like Equifax or whatever, And they go, we need help. And so I created a little bit of checklist for them. It's very similar to the one you had before. But then after I scare the bejeebers out of people, which is real easy to do, somebody will usually say, what can I do? What's an individual to do? And in fact, I'm on a lot of radio talk shows in the early mornings, a lot of commute time talk shows right now talking because they're interested in these are small business people that listen to the radio going to work. What do we do? Learn to recognize what a phishing email is all about and delete it. If it's important, it'll come back. If it's legitimate, it'll come back. And if you delete it often enough and they really need you, they'll pick up the phone and call. Use two-factor authentication whenever you can. Make backups, of course. Upgrade everything. Keep it as up to snuff as you possibly can. The JP Morgan attack was one unupgraded NT server that started it. Manage your passwords. This is hard. I probably have 300 different logins, and I use a product called 1Password that's had the heck pounded out of it by the bad guys, but so far it's holding. But this is really key, and I'm sure you all know that. Don't go to Starbucks and do a bunch of banking transactions. And don't do it on airplanes. Oh my gosh. These Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi things, people sit in the parking lot and sniff them. I'm sure I'm preaching to the crowd. And then lock your credit cards. Think before you act. Just like you wouldn't walk into a strange building, why should you go to a strange website? Just think before you act. So I think we are on a path, hopefully, that people will think differently. I know resilience can deliver confidence. It has. It let you to walk into this building today, to sit in these chairs and not worry about the building falling down, not worrying about the power going out, not worrying about a fire. That's the kind of mentality. It'll take time that we need in our cyber world to get there. So that's my story. I hope you've enjoyed it. We got some time for questions, I think. Yeah. But you guys know more about this than I do, probably. So, okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions? We have a microphone there if you can step to the mic.
Oh, okay. All right. Make it work.
Good morning. Thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Question, as a CEO working in cyber a long time, Elizabeth Warren has recently submitted some legislation that would make the lack of cyber diligency criminal for the CEOs. Do you think something that is needed, and do you think that it would actually change your CEO peers and the way that they think about cyber and the way that they budget, whether they resource their cyber teams? Just
That is a great question, and it scares the heck out of me. Yeah, it'll change their behavior. Just so you may recall, the SEC now, it's criminal when you sign these financial statements and stuff and file them with the SEC. When you sign it, you're now liable for it, even though you may not understand every word in there. But therefore, you will have to put in place, as CEO, signing that document, which as a director now, I even have to sign that document in a public company. We have to ensure that there is a system of people, processes, and technology that will get us the data so that I feel confident enough to sign that. So yes, I think it could be very effective. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a sledgehammer. But it's a place to start a conversation. Related to that, I talk to a lot of state legislatures because a lot of the states are frustrated with the government. The government's been trying to pass cyber stuff for a long time. NIST is working hard. That's very popular in the SANS Institute and the CIS. But I think the states, and if you think about it, that's really where your information lives. That's where your property. That's where the information about your property, your driving records, all that stuff is really state or local. Only your federal income tax information is really more in that and of course, if you're in the military, all your personnel information. But states, I think, is where the action needs to happen first. Yes, sir.
Okay, let's see. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
2 questions. One is, have you seen any traction in terms of helping assess the consequences to different risks in cybersecurity? I know the insurance company is working on it because they see it as a growth industry, but also they have to make sure they make money as well.
Yes, there is a lot talking about there. In fact, Wall Street, the bankers have these buckets of industries. There's, firewalls, network protection, intrusion, and now there's this thing called risk management. It used to be a little tiny thing with about 10 companies in it. Now there's about 50 companies in it, and it's growing 50% a year. So it's one of the fastest growing buckets: risk management, risk assessment, and trying to figure out where the problems are. Because if a board asks the question, as a board member, you only can do three things. I can take the company's treasure and invest, buy things or fix it myself, build it. I can ignore it at your peril, or I can insure it. Well, I don't know, burning down the factory is not, insurance may rebuild the factory, but I've lost revenue and employees and everything else. So that's not, cyber insurance is coming, but I don't think it's a real option just yet. So I think you're faced with do nothing or start doing the treasury, and therefore I need to know where to put my precious treasury dollars in that, and how do I do that through measurement, risk assessment, and understanding what to do. So it's a circular path on that.
So the second question is related to the process people technology, and I encountered it doing knowledge management operations in both Germany and Iraq. And one of the things we tried to do was anticipate what's going to happen, because if you put all those three factors together based on yesterday's news, it may be too late. So how does RedSeal address that?
Well, how does RedSeal address that? Well, you're right. I think resilience is all about, you don't know what's going to happen. You have to ask yourself, what can go wrong? You got to obviously study and learn. But, simulation is a very powerful learning tool. Pilots go through a lot of simulation. We simulate, oil flow in the ground. We simulate a lot of stuff to figure out how to manage and deal with stuff. So RedSeal, when we build this model of your network, it is a model, just like a spreadsheet is a model. It has formulas, and you can do virtual penetration testing. You can remove a piece of it. You can deform a router, malform a router's routing tables, and see what happens. So you can simulate what would happen if something in my DMZ were to get infected, and how far it can go and what could it do. So having the ability to do that automatically is pretty powerful, and it's really more, if you may remember the semiconductor back in the 80s, suddenly we were simulating chips, right? We didn't have to build a chip to test it. We could actually just simulate it all in software. RedSeal's technology is very similar to that chip design software. You can design the network, you can test the network, you can even extract the routing tables for the intended purpose of the network from our software. So very much like what we did in chips in the 30 years ago, we can do it in the network world with RedSeal, and many other things, by the way. We don't do it all, but the ability to simulate is critical. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So as the SEC and many other federal agencies in other countries, let's say, require publicly traded companies to provide accurate statements on their financial records, wouldn't some sort of requirement to state their state of security, whatever that is, we'd have to define that. Wouldn't that be potentially a helpful way to understand the risk that these companies bring to those who use their services or products?
Completely agree. Yeah, the SEC is probably I don't want to say it's a hammer, but it's a soft hammer, because usually when the SEC implements something, they do it over a period of time, and they look at the size of companies. The whole Sarbanes-Oxley stuff was grouped out like that. But there should be something. And the first question about, I'm signing a piece of paper that says I'm cyber capable or whatever. Yeah, the SEC is the place to start, not the DHS, the SEC, because the way you get a company's attention is you talk about money, right? The board has a finite amount of money. There's a budget. There's products. There's innovation. Am I going to rob the R&D budget in order to spend another 10 million on, or $1 billion on cyber? You don't want to, but that's the choice that's having to be made, because it's a closed system, right? If I have to make a profit and I have to innovate in order to stay competitive, I mean, you can just imagine the inner workings. But I think the SEC is exactly the place. And some of my friends, and I see occasionally language, but I don't think they're very serious about it yet. Yeah. If you know differently, let me know. Maybe we should write it for them. That'd be fun. Yes.
So your concept of resilience is a very useful one. You're saying that regardless of so my infrastructure has the ability to, continue to function despite attacks, something like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's good. So, but I think the biggest problem in security is the knowing what are my requirements. So there are, security is all about preserving some fundamental properties of encryption, of confidentiality, integrity, access control, authorization. So, but the question is, and there are tools to enforce those properties at all the different protocol layers, starting from the physical layer all the way up to the application. The question is, what is my policy? What are my requirements? In a complex system with 14,000 or 50,000 routers, what is my policy? It's very hard to know. So if you don't know what your policy is, then how are you going to
That's right.
secure it?
I
So
completely agree.
how do we know what the policy is? Yeah.
So,
What my requirements are. What do I want?
yeah, no, that's a good point. So there are standards, obviously, in different organs like PCI and things like that. There are standards out there, but the real policy is the one that make you operate safely. So, like I said, Target may or may not have had a policy that said there was a connection from
Right.
the HVAC to the point of sale. I'm sure they didn't have. I'm sure they have a policy. Well, they do now.
Yeah.
But so you have to think about that as the operator of anything. You've got to think about what those processes are, what matters to you, what's important to you. If you're in the financial business, speed may be really important, or some sort of encryption may be important. But you got to have policies and therefore implement it. But I think what's missing, there are a lot of policies. All the companies I visit, all the large companies I visit, they have lots of policies, but they can't prove that they've been instituted properly. They can't tell when the policy is out of compliance. Military. Big base. Guy says, I want to have a connection from my base to my general's base over here. So he says, okay, great. And the MIS guys go down there and they type some stuff and suddenly there's a connection. Really? So what if you could ask, when you were the colonel in charge of that SOC or that network operations, you could say, yes, sir, I can do that. But let me tell you, you're going to open up 500 new vulnerabilities between here and there when I make that connection. Policy says I can't do that, but sir, I'll do it for you. You can override that policy. The point is you give them the tools, you give them the analytics to take it to the leadership level to make a decision. That's what's missing in a big, I think that's a little bit to what your point is. We can, by the way, the software, we interpret policies. We can actually print it out what we think, Enclave A should or should not talk to Enclave B. We give you that kind of information, and you can say, oh, that's bad, or great. So. Yeah, process. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. That's a good question. That's early days. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a question regarding what you see from companies in terms of the definition of resilience.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a wide spectrum. You mentioned some of your clients. Are they trying to stop adversaries like nation states, or is their primary adversary like the SEC, or what's their flavor?
Yeah.
Can you give us a flavor of the different definitions you're getting for resilience when you work with companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me think about that. So, resilience, you can look it up, right? You can go on the dictionary. It's surviving an impairment of some sort. How do you survive that impairment and the world doesn't know you've been impaired? You may just, as an example, I think it was July of 2016, United Airlines, Wall Street Journal, and one other company in New York all went out at the same time. They all went down. The websites went dark. United Airlines reservation system went out, all at the same moment. And I remember my Twitter feed blew up. It's like, oh my God, we're under a cyber attack. No, it was a router upgrade. It was a router upgrade, a scheduled router upgrade. Now that was just the 3 that reported it and made the news. How many thousands of other? It was a Cisco router upgrade, by the way. So were those systems resilient? Well, maybe some were, maybe some weren't. We have, in our business world, we have disaster recovery. That's a form of resilience. We have business continuity. That's a form of resilience. But what we don't have is and both of those are pretty severe, right? Your business processes are broken. You can't collect revenue. That was Target's issue. And then disaster recovery, we, of course, all lived through the 9/11 events and what happened to a lot of that. But there's something in the middle, and that's where we are with cyber. It's like, what if I just get in and mess around with you a little bit? What if I just tinker with your systems a little bit and slow you down? That's what Stuxnet was, right? Stuxnet went to the Iranian centrifuge plants and fooled them that they were doing fine, but they were putting out junk in the back end. So that's the resilience thing taken to a real deep level. So other examples, you know, these cyber protection teams that the Army has stood up. There are 5,000 of them. These, like I say, these are guys and gals that carry laptops instead of rifles. Their mission, of course, is to play the what-if game. They simulate these networks and the forward operating base and all that. So I've actually seen some of those acting, and they will hire red teams, right, to come in and try to do the penetration. So that's a form of resilience. It's interesting. If you had a fire, no one reports, well, the sprinkler system worked. They don't say that, but it did probably. If it didn't work, you for sure it didn't. You knew that. Other, you know, physical resilience systems are seat belts and airbags. Those are things. But in the cyber world, if you survive an attack and you don't tell the world about it, that is nirvana, right? That is good news. Sony couldn't hide. You know, only the ones who read in the newspaper. Can you imagine how many others? I do know of a large. Here was one of resilience. This is a company that builds nuclear power plants and other large infrastructure things. They had a massive attack from our friends to the east. They were not very resilient, and they had to go through a massive forensic. So now they are prepared to be resilient. They've got the right alarm bells. They can shut down their network with a flip of a switch. They can just close the ports and go silent. But they have to stay open in order to stay in business. I can't mention the name of the company, obviously, but that is an example of one where they did not survive, then they came back. And that's the kind of resilience. Those aren't great examples, but we don't hear about the ones that work.
So
Yep.
just
Yeah.
follow up on this. Coming from the Homeland Security side of things,
Yeah.
working with DHS a long time, resilience, they really focus on the design so that you have the minimal impact.
Right.
Then the detection, the response to recovery. And you're sort of you're sort of considering like the response to a disaster to be the resiliency. And I think of it more as the design of the system.
In the front end,
and
yeah.
reducing the impact for it. So I think these are all aspects of it, but I think for the best resilient system, you have to start from the front. And a lot of companies need help with the existing systems that are out there, but helping them come up with that design and understand that, and that's where the measurement is, of course, a key component, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. If we could turn it all off and rebuild it, we'd build it differently, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
But we can't. So that's why.
How do we get to that design
Well, that's
for
part
resilience?
that's part of this response capability. And if you think about, okay, I'm going to build a building, I got to go in and I got to retrofit the sprinklers, I got to retrofit everything. That's what people are doing. That's what they're spending money on. I'm buying new routing equipment or whatever it is. But you got to know what you have in order. You couldn't retrofit this building if you didn't have the blueprints. It'd be like, you know, the architect standing outside taking a few photographs, walk around them and take pictures, and then say, okay, we're going to change this and that. It's like, I don't even know where the doors are. I don't know where the windows are.
Well, you're assuming
So-
that the blueprint represents
Yeah.
how it was actually constructed, too,
Yeah,
right?
and that
Which
does.
is
That's why you
necessary.
have to have the analytics, right? That's why now they come in. The architects come in with drones and they fly through a building and they collect all the information, LiDAR and all that stuff. That's really amazing. But that's where we are. That's the state of the world. So we got to, and like I said, even the DIA. I should be careful. I guess I've already blown that. We found stuff in the cloud they thought was right, and it wasn't. That's okay. It happens. You know, these are just human beings. We make mistakes. Yeah, I probably blew that. Yeah.
I'll move you along quickly. Okay, so this goes back to the first question, and this may be an unfair question, is can you talk at all when you've seen the really good companies that embrace this resilient perspective? You know, you come to them and say, listen, you've got a score of 800 or 800, and maybe for what you're doing, you need a score of 810 or pick a number. It's going to cost you this much to get there. The consequence of not doing it is going to cost you this much. So there's some risk assessments and there's some investment decisions that have to be made. how do they handle those?
Yeah,
Given the kind of like
Sorry.
this developing world of risk assessment right now.
How do they handle that? Well,
Given their focus on numbers.
but you're talking about the arbitrage, right? So it's a big deal. When I'm getting that first meeting with a CISO or a CIO, that I ask them things like, do I know what my infrastructure looks like? But the most important question is, what's important to you? If a leader can tell me what's important to them, then I know they're thinking about it, and they're already halfway there. And then it's a matter of assessing the cost, the risk, and doing the probabilities, building that big decision tree to decide what to do. But in fact, I think it was under President Obama, he put an edict out. All the agencies were supposed to figure out where their precious assets, where their important assets were with regard to information. And they went off and answered those questions, but until that was just 2 or 3 years ago. So that's a key question. I said, what matters to you? I just recently was at Clear, this company that has the biometric stuff at the airports, and they're deploying. They want to deploy this everywhere. You couldn't walk in this building without a Clear. Can you imagine the risk assessment that they have to do and the false positive issues that they have to deal with? All that goes into that calculation about what to do, and they are very keen on. I said, take me on a sales call. I was talking to the head of the CISO, who's not really a sales guy. He's sort of a swashbuckling, bearded guy, a little overweight, rides a motorcycle, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I said, so take me on a sales call. How do you describe what you do? How do you do that risk assessment? Because what they're claiming is they're going to make the fidelity of who walks through the door better. And it's very complicated, but it always starts with what's important. And he said the same thing. He said, we always ask the customer, what's important to you? If I let one bad guy in out of 100,000 at a football game, is that okay? There's no such thing as perfect risk. So you got to assess that probability. And that's hard. In the cyber world, we work with AIG and Aon and some of the other folks to get there, but it's a long process. It's early days on that probability. I'm blabbering, I'm sorry. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for having me. I look forward to seeing you later. Thank you.